Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's Dan Schifrin with StoryForward. I'm going to be talking with Evan Wolkenstein today, the author of Turtle Boy. I'm going to give him a fuller introduction in just a minute. Those of you who have come to previous conversations, StoryForward is a framework for talking about story, writing, reading, and community. I interview all kinds of artists and storytellers. We've had a great time on this show the last several weeks. A quick couple of Zoom things. Please keep your audio off for our conversation. The chat room is open, and there's some information already about where you can get Evan's book. Okay. Evan, welcome.
Thank you.
The formal introduction goes as followed. Matthew Evan Wolkenstein is Director of Experimental Learning at the Jewish High School of the Bay in San Francisco. He attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Hebrew University, and the Pardes Institute for Jewish Studies. He's written a lot in a lot of great places, including the Forward, Tablet, the Washington Post, and Bim Bam. Turtle Boy is his first novel. He lives in San Francisco with his wife and daughter. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Great, fantastic. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
My first question is, you have a great title, Director of Experiential Learning. Can you say just a bit about what that is and who are the students that are in your various classrooms?
Sure. So I wear two different hats at school. There's in class, I teach comparative religion and two different Tanakh classes, one of which is about relationships and the other is about power and the way you see the world. And then outside of the classroom, and I've been teaching you can call it formal education, in that it's in a classroom for about 16 years. And along the way, I started through the course of my being a teacher, I began to take on some of the informal education. And that we called it that at first, informal, but then I think like a few years into that, the name started to switch. I don't know if I had to do with that or if the culture was switching. And people were sort of feeling like if you just call it informal, all you're doing is saying what it's not. You're not saying what it is. So the term experiential education started to take off, and I think we leaned into that. And what that means is I'm on a team of people who thinks about the experience of kids from 3 months before they're ninth graders, as they come to the school for their first time, all the way until their graduation. And we're thinking about creating experiences for them that are educational, that are help them through the journey of being a high school student, that help them to discover themselves, that help them to connect to others, and to help them find what it is within them that they want to bring out into the world. So sometimes it takes the form of a great journey, and we all go, when there's not a pandemic, we all go to Zion National Park. And sometimes it takes the form of the school going on a Shabbaton for 3 days of intensive hanging out in Jewish stuff. Sometimes it's holidays, sometimes it's student council, sometimes it's just how do we decorate the hall. So it's all the things from the ground to the ceiling, from everything that's not inside the classroom, we are thinking through as a team.
You know what's so interesting about the teen years, I have teenagers at home, is this idea that they are creating themselves almost in real time in terms of the stories they tell themselves about who they are. And so, you know, their experience as a teenager is partly in the classroom, but so much of it occurs elsewhere, especially with relationships. We spoke a few weeks ago about an article I was writing about something else when we realized that we wanted to have this conversation together. And you said something really interesting to me. And actually, I wrote it down. I'm just going to quote it back to you. You said in this power and perceptions class that you're teaching, you've been talking all year about how we are empowered and disempowered by the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. And I'm wondering if you could expand upon that a little more. Like, in what ways do you see that working itself out? And also, I wonder about social media. It's this kind of storytelling feedback machine that people are constantly in. How are students figuring out their stories about themselves?
Well, it's a great question. I think that it strikes me as you're spot on that one thing that makes young people different than older people is that because they have fewer years and less time to practice it, there's a plasticity to the way they see themselves that adults don't have, at least without us making a real effort to see ourselves in the world in a different way. And parenthetically, I think even as grown-ups, from time to time, we have these monumental experiences that change the way we fundamentally see things. But teenagers have those like once a week.
Right.
They have profound experiences. It can be magical, the way that they just, their minds can be blown by experiences that they have and things that they learn. And it can also be a lot of turmoil because the self is in flux in a way that it isn't for adults. That can lead to a lot of creativity, but can also lead to a lot of overwhelm. And so a lot of what we're doing in this class is starting to help students to think more metacognitively about, what are the stories that have been said to you about who you are and what you're capable of, and what stories would you like to replace that with, and what can be empowering about that, but also are there limitations to that just based on being human beings in the world. So that's what we're doing in the class. And then to respond to the other side in terms of social media, the thing that strikes me is that we it's well documented. We know about the echo chamber effect of social media and the way that if Paul Simon said, a man hears what he wants to hear, disregards the rest. If he said that all those years ago, it's even more true now because there's more validation available for how you see the world at a single click. And Facebook does a lot of the work for us, making sure that we never hear narratives that are not the ones that are convenient for us to hear. So, it's really set up for us to hear what we want to hear and to disregard everything else. Not even, when you say disregard, I would not even know about the other narratives. And we're seeing a lot of that unfolding in our country now as competing narratives never join. There's no marketplace where dialogue happens. So, some of what I am trying to do in Power and Perception is to help students to learn to listen with critical turn of mind, but open ears, and to demonstrate that they're hearing what other people are saying. I don't know whether that's going to take the form of them going off into dialogue groups with people of different political positions in the future. I don't know if it's going to take that form, but what I would like it to do is it will lead them to have a conversation with a parent, a relative, a friend, somebody in their world, and maybe their circles will get wider as their narratives are challenged. And they begin to realize that just because they've heard and are holding a narrative that's not the convenient one, doesn't mean they're going to get swept away in it, that they're actually big enough to hold that. And I think our minds are expanded as we learn to hold multiple narratives. It's one of the powers of reading. It's one of the reasons why reading is so important.
There's a productive discomfort that comes about from being in that space.
Yeah, productive discomfort, and also just an inspiration by influence.
I have a couple more questions in that vein, but I think I want to bring Turtle Boy, Alex Levine, or Levine. Yeah. I've only read it. I haven't heard it spoken.
I haven't heard it. I haven't heard it either. I'm not sure which it is.
Will you read a little bit from the book? Tell us just a little bit about, give us a little bit of context, and we'll read, and then we'll go further into that and connect all the pieces as we go on.
Sure, I'd love to. So this is Turtle Boy, and the scene that we're going to be hearing, that I'm going to be reading, takes place just a couple of chapters in. I think it's about 5 or 6 chapters. And at this point in the story, you've met Will, and you realize a few things about him. One is that he loves turtles, and that's one of the reasons he's called Turtle Boy. But the other, there's basically 3 reasons. 1, he loves turtles. 2 is that he is bullied for having a facial condition that other kids say makes him look like a cartoon turtle. He has an underdeveloped chin, which incidentally is a cosmetic problem that I had as well in middle school, and had well-being implications beyond just cosmetic, although anybody who's ever had a conversation with somebody who's experienced body dysmorphia will know that you never say just cosmetic about that stuff. But there were some health issues associated with it as well. Anyhow, so those are two ways he's a turtle. And then the third way is that he is isolated. He self-isolates, he keeps to himself, he doesn't go out into the world, he doesn't want to access stories other than his own, if you want to bring that thread back into it. And he is in a bit of a pinch because in order to get his bar mitzvah, he needs to do 40 hours of community service. But every opportunity he had over the summer, he panicked and escaped. Didn't go into the soup kitchen. Didn't call or contact the people he was supposed to call or contact. And his Rabbi Harris finally starts to get an idea and tells him before the scene that we're about to read that he's going to be meeting a kid in the hospital. Will hates hospitals more than anything. His dad died when he was 4 in a hospital. He doesn't really remember that, but memory will become a big part of the story later. And so all he knows in the scene that we're about to read is he's heading into one of his worst nightmares, going to a hospital with a rabbi he doesn't yet trust to meet a person he doesn't know. He's entering the underworld for the first time. Here we go. So Rabbi Harris has already picked him up from school and has let him know, by the way, the kid that you're meeting in the hospital, he's not just in there for the short term. He has a condition called a mitochondrial illness that is life-threatening and probably going to be terminal. And we're learning that just on page 39 already. The truth is hitting. I managed to walk into the hospital and a nurse looks up at me from behind a desk. "Are you Will?" she asks. "Rabbi Harris said you were coming. I'm Roxanne." Standing here with the weird hospital smells and the sound of buzzers and beeping, I'm already feeling queasy and dizzy, like when I visited Dr. Haffetz with Mom over the summer. I wish I could leave. The nurse comes around the desk and leads me a ways down the hall to a closed door. She knocks. There's no answer. She knocks again, louder. There's no answer. "Maybe he's sleeping," I ask. "How about I come back another time?" "He can't hear us," she says, "but trust me, it's not because he's sleeping." She bangs on the door with her fist. "RJ!" she yells. She sighs and turns to me. "He doesn't like it when I barge in," she says, "but he's not giving us a choice." She turns the door handle and a strange sound, quick clacking like hundreds of fingers on keyboard keys, pours out from a crack in the door. The door swings open. Rabbi Harris's description of Ralph's illness made me picture lots of machines, sad bouquets of flowers, blankets pulled up to a pale patient's chin. I didn't expect a teenage kid wearing a tropical colored shirt with a string of little shells around his neck. He's thrashing his shaggy hair around and banging with drumsticks on a disc of rubber and plastic about a foot in diameter, sitting on the bed in front of him. He has no idea we're standing here. He clacks and hammers with his drumsticks, and his expression is all fury and intensity, as if he's trying to beat down a door with his sticks alone. He has thick eyebrows that bunch over his squinted shut eyes. But he isn't smashing savagely. Each drumstick's tip strikes its own precise spot, blurring in a perfect pattern, like the buzz of a bee's wings. His head bobs to whatever's in his headphones, and finally he increases the tempo and explodes into a finale. Both sticks smash the rubber disc at once with a final shkaback. Then silence. He pushes his headphones back onto his neck and looks up, noticing us for the first time. "You're supposed to knock first," he says. "I did," Roxanne says. "You're Will?" he says to me. "Yeah, you're Ralph?" "No one calls me Ralph," he says, "except my dad and Rabbi Harris. It's RJ." He reaches for my hand and shakes it, which feels weirdly grown up. That's when I notice he's wearing a mass of bracelets, brown woven string and colored threads, 5 or 6 of them. The bracelets don't hide the fact that his wrist is so thin I can see long bones through his skin. He may be 3 years older than I am, but he's barely any bigger. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted," says Roxanne. She shuts the door behind her. I shift back and forth on my feet and wait for RJ to say something. He catches me peering down at the rubber disc on his bed. "It's not polite to stare," he says. "Oh, sorry," I say, taking a step back. "Just kidding," he says. "It's called a practice pad." "What's it for?" I ask. "I'm banging on it with drumsticks," he says. "It's shaped like a drum. What do you think it's for?" At first, I think it's a rhetorical question, one of those questions you're not supposed to answer, but he's glaring at me. "Say something, idiot," I tell myself. "Practicing drums?" I ask. "Very good," he says. "Here." He holds the sticks out to me. "Try it. Let's see what you got." "Oh, no, that's okay," I say. Try it, he says more insistently. I shake my head and I step back again. He pushes his headphones over his ears again and bangs on the practice pad, this time more fiercely. His eyes are fixed on an invisible spot on the bed in front of him. He doesn't show any sign of stopping. At first, I feel like it's my fault. Maybe I said something wrong, but as the minutes pass and he continues drumming on his pad, ignoring me, I begin to feel angry. I don't want to be here. And if this guy doesn't want me here, then I should just walk out the door and go wait for Rabbi Harris in the lobby. The only problem is Roxanne might see me leave, and I won't get my signature for the 40 hours form. Maybe I can find a place to sit and read. Behind me, pushed into a corner, is a large cushion. It's gray and has 3 layers, almost like a cake. I sit down on it, get my book out, and start reading. On my right side is a chest-high case turned to face the 3-layer cake chair. I can see a set of shelves peeking out from behind a curtain. The corner is pulled to the side at the bottom. It's revealing shirts and underwear and a phalanx of 5-hour energy drinks in tiny red bottles, a pair of slippers, deodorant, shaving cream, and some white underwear. I assume this stuff belongs to RJ's dad. Maybe he sleeps here sometimes. On the same shelf, I can see a bunch of bags of Funyuns. I've never had Funyuns. Mom doesn't let me have junk food. Suddenly, there's a sharp knock on the door, and it swings open. It's a nurse, not Roxanne, but a different one. She has short gray hair and glasses. RJ stops drumming and sticks his arm out obligingly. The nurse sets up some packaged medical stuff on a tray table. RJ ignores her, and the nurse ignores RJ as she unwraps a needle. I hate needles. I start to feel faint. I want to leave the room, but I'm afraid I'll pass out. I put my head between my knees and I start to take deep breaths. Ow, says RJ. Denise, you're trying to find a vein, not dig for treasure. The nurse doesn't say anything back. Then RJ starts singing really loudly. You see the rate they come down the escalator. Now listen to the tube train accelerator. Then you realize that you gotta have a purpose, or this place is gonna knock you out sooner or later. He sings in a loud British accent, escalator and accelerator and sooner or later. And then he sings ner, 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 and ner, ner, over and over like he's imitating an electric guitar. Finally, the nurse sweeps up all the equipment and leaves the room. And my head is still between my knees. You all right down there? Drop a contact lens? Needles, I say. I hate needles. How original, says RJ. Do you also hate spiders, homework, and the word moist? Last summer, I needed about 20 blood tests, I say, ignoring his sarcasm. The nurse couldn't find the vein and she kept sticking me with the needle and I actually passed out. Oh, wow. 20 blood tests, he says. He still sounds unimpressed. Sounds like an average Tuesday for me. What do you need them for? I opened a topic I do not want to talk about. I'm going to have to keep my head down and see if he changes the subject. What did you need them for? He asks again louder. I was getting tested to see if I might have any joint diseases, I say, looking up. He raises his eyebrows. And I don't, I say. I have aplasia of the mandibular condyles and micronathia. As soon as I say it, I wonder why I'm telling him these things. I don't talk about this stuff with anyone. I don't know what those things are, he says. Micro, whatever you said. What is that? It means I need surgery on my jaw, I say, in December. Okay, for what? He sits up a little straighter. I really don't like talking about the surgery. It feels different from just thinking about it. Something about the words coming out of my mouth makes it real, and I don't want it to be any more real. I'm waiting, he says. They basically move my jaw forward, I say, and stop, but it feels like I haven't said enough, so I add, and they take bone out of my hip, and they put it in my jaw, and then they wire it shut, and I have to blend up my food so I can eat through a straw for 2 months. Yum, says RJ, like one of those ice cream blizzards. Vanilla ice cream, Butterfinger, and meatballs. I can't believe my ears. This is the scariest, worst thing I can imagine. He's making fun of it. I'm trying to keep my patience. Mint chip with chicken, he continues. Oh, here's a good one. Chocolate ice cream with tacos. You know, compared to the slop they feed me in this place, it actually sounds good. He grabs his drumsticks and plays Badump Bump on his stupid practice pad. Sounds like Badak Dak because his pad is made out of rubber and plastic, but I still know what he's doing. He's teasing me. I'm not telling you anything else, I say. I pick my book up and I angrily page through it. You seem like a perfectly normal weirdo 7th grader, he says. Believe me, I've had my share of Rabbi Harris's dorky bar mitzvah kids come through here, and you're all weenies. I ignore him and continue to page through my book. Do they tease you? He wonders. The kids at school. Do they pick on you? I ignore him further, although I realize I'm flipping pages too fast to read anything. Do they call you names? I slam my book shut. Yes, actually, they do. What do they call you? His eyes are trained on me, and this doesn't feel good at all. He's not asking because he cares. He's asking because he's looking for something new to make fun of. I'm not saying a word, but I've opened my book again, and I'm flipping pages, and I'm trying to hide my face, and I'm crying silently. They call me Turtle Boy, I say.
I should also mention that you read the audiobook also for Turtle Boy.
Yes, yeah. Penguin Random House first debut as a audiobook voice, which was, you and I were talking about this earlier, was physically grueling, but one of those kind of like, I didn't expect this little dream to come true. Like, I love audiobooks, and I never thought I'd have that chance.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. Well, I heard different things than when I read it. It's funny how when you read it or hear it, you know, different things come out. And well, so right, so the 40 hours of community service felt different to me all of a sudden, and I slipped into more of a Jewish context for that, and I just thought about 40 years in the desert. You know, like
you pick up on that? yeah, that was a symbolic number.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that before, and yeah, well, you know, the thing that I thought about reading the book was the idea of what it means to take a journey into self, and I think a lot about the idea of the hero's journey. There's just kind of this classic mode of thinking about journeys, both in terms of action, but also, you know, psychological growth.
Yeah.
So I teach creative writing to middle school and high school students, and we talk about the hero's journey a lot. And I just was thinking about, Will, you know, the idea of the journey about being forced to go outside of your normal place, to acknowledge that you are different in some way, to be tasked with something that seems more than you can bear, to have some mentors who teach you and give you what you need in order to succeed. And then you come back home in some way and you are transformed. And that you have something more and you are able to begin to go to the next level of your life. And so I don't know.
And don't forget the ever important magic weapon.
And the magic weapon. Yeah, what's the magic weapon in Turtle Boy?
I'll give you one hint.
Oh, yes. The drumsticks.
Yeah.
Interesting. Is it
to him, right?
Yeah. Is it a weapon or is it a wand or it's a tool? It's a tool of some kind. Interesting.
Yeah. All of the above.
Yeah. So it's interesting. We don't often think of, or as bar mitzvah, b'nai mitzvah kid, we often don't think of our rabbi as being like a mentor in a heroic story like Obi-Wan Kenobi is, or Hagrid or Dumbledore in Harry Potter. But in a way, he serves that role. It's actually one of the great things about the book is the beautiful and complicated and slightly atraditional view of a rabbi who really does play that role and who understands what a young person needs for them to get to their next place.
And you know, I'm influenced by all those. I'm influenced by rabbis that I knew. I certainly didn't have any kind of a Rabbi Harris growing up. I never had I did not have a formal Jewish educator that I looked up to. You know, there were nice people around, but I felt too alone and disconnected to have the type of relationship that Will's going to have with Rabbi Harris. But I did read all the books, and I was jealous that Bilbo got to have Gandalf. And I wanted something like that. And I think I remember being struck by how Gandalf always disappears when Bilbo thinks he needs him most, but actually returns when he does need him most. Yeah. And I borrowed some of that kind of the way that Rabbi Harris will suddenly be there, you know, in a moment of darkness, but often leave Will to fight for himself through some of the darker battles.
Yeah, that's great. So I wasn't crazy to see some echo of that, some conscious echo of
no, for sure,
that journey. Well, it's interesting. You know, we think about we think about heroic journeys sometimes as mythological ones of like Odysseus or Hercules or others where they're fighting things that seem beyond them, let's say physically. But just growing into oneself as a young person and all the changes and the struggle to kind of create and recreate oneself, those are tough times. And there's a heroism of kind of grit and perseverance, even in what seem like non-heroic lives.
Yeah, and I would yes and that. And I would say not only is that the case, but I would say it is more common, probably throughout humanity's existence, that that the young people who are hearing these heroes' journey stories around, you know, tribal fires or around the family hearth, more likely were hearing. Were applying that story to their quotidian existence than they were actually soon going out on a dangerous mission of their own, and we're using that as a literal guidance. In other words, I think like you know how so many stories feature a king, but how many kings are there really at any given time? Most of us are not kings, but we're all the kings of our own existence. You know, we all see ourselves as tragic or either a tragedy or comedy as kings because we're the ones that are making our own choices. And I think likewise, every teenager either already does see themselves as, you know, on a hero's journey, or if they don't, they would be benefited from it because that kind of story would give them a sort of structure to be able to make sense of the pain and the struggle that they're going through.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, even the time that Homer was writing his books 2,500 years ago, those stories were already myth. I mean, people reading those were already applying them to what they were doing in the marketplace.
Sure, and most of the people who listen to them are probably blacksmiths' apprentices who, like, the biggest adventure they ever had was dropping a coal on their foot. But if they thought of themselves as having, you know, these, you know, there's demons and there's giants and there's monsters within ourselves, just like the giants in the book that, you know, Will's Parsha is about encountering giants and learning to see that the giants are smaller than they appear is one of the themes of the book. And he's borrowing from Torah narrative as if it's one of the great myths, you know, one of the great myths, as opposed to it's a religious text that's been dumped on his lap.
Right. Well, let's go Jewish for a minute. Let's go really Jewish since we're there. So again, when we were talking before, you know, there was this question, you were saying, you know, is this a Jewish book? How Jewish a book is it? And you also asked the question of yourself, like what tikkun might it be doing in the world? Tikkun being a kind of like a repair of the world, what kind of
restoration.
Restoration, right? And so, you know, from, you know, my read of the book, it does feel very Jewish in terms of all the issues with the rabbi and the bar mitzvah. Like clearly it's not only implied that there's Jewish practice and ideas, it is suffused with them, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is an entirely Jewish book, or put another way, there are many ways to think about a book having a Jewish content or Jewish orientation. Do you have a sense after having written it and now starting to talk about it and getting feedback, is it more Jewish than you thought? Is it differently Jewish? Is there another way to think about that for yourself?
Yeah, it's actually more than I thought. I have to say that my agent, when I was, you know, when the book was in its its early drafts, there were times when I wasn't sure one of the things that people sometimes observe about this book is it has a lot of threads. And at times it's very full. There were times when I thought, you know, maybe this bar mitzvah thing on top of everything else is just too much, and maybe I should take it out. And my agent, like you could hear him like leaping through the phone to prevent me from even considering cutting that. And I think he knew that, you know, he's not Jewish. He's in publishing, so he's obviously Jew adjacent because the publishing world is such a Jewish profession in some ways. But I think he had a sense that the themes of the book shine brightest when shown through a Jewish lens. And because they shine brighter and with more, I don't know, soul or more specificity, more from the heart, therefore in its from the heartness, it actually becomes more accessible to other people. The more specific and the more personal, the more other people can potentially see themselves in it. People don't want to meet a blank canvas. They want to meet somebody who's a something. And now that it's done, I find that my feelings about Judaism, which are vast and complex and many layers, and my feelings about how Judaism is in the book, it's almost like an ink blot. You can get a sense of who I am Jewishly through reading the book. And because the book is so from my heart, it's not surprising that the Jewishness comes out in that. So I would say more Jewish than I thought. I probably couldn't have stopped it, even if I wanted to, because of the kind of person I am. My agent had the foresight to make sure of that. And should this book make it to the screen, which I would love to have happen, and if I have to make some difficult cuts here and there, which sometimes happens when books are adapted, one thing that I'm gonna go to the mat for, go to the bima for, is keeping the bar mitzvah. It's very important to me.
Yeah, oh, that's great. Yeah, so maybe just as a follow-up, just thinking about next steps for you. I'm delighted to hear that there could be a screen adaptation in the future. You had said that you are possibly working on a sequel and
already
and a curriculum for Turtle Boy.
Yeah. So the curriculum comes along at a point where I think Jewish educators, both formal and informal, are desperate for content. So camps are being canceled, and in-person book clubs are on hold, and youth programming is being paused, and there's a big scramble for what we're going to do this summer, and people are working really hard to make that happen. So one thing that I thought is, if this book, which is so much about isolation, and shows a message of hope about the power of connection and the power of friendship and the power of coming together to break through isolation, come what may, if that is something that can bring hope and inspiration and some joy to young people, to adults as well, then I can get ahead of the curve for that and get a curriculum together. So I worked with an educator at Pardes, and we have 4 units. They're available on my website to have a look at. And I'm hoping that bar and bat mitzvah programs and educators will be interested, and I'm trying to communicate that's its availability. And and then the second thing was about the sequel. Sequel. Yes, so I have the very good fortune. I know a lot of authors don't find themselves in this situation. I'm very grateful that the British publishing house that bought Turtle Boy to publish in the UK, they're called Usborne. They bought the rights for Turtle Boy and requested a sequel or spin-off in the same package. So when I circled back to them and I said, what do you think about a book that centers on Will's best friend, Shira? She's a strong girl. She's got a lot to say. She's a powerful character, and she often takes a real leadership role with her friends and her peers. They jumped all over it. So I'm 2 drafts into the spinoff, and excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, that's great. You want to? Can you put into chat just where your website people can go? It's
sure. I'd be happy to.
Also, I will also put. Okay, great, fantastic. There is a question in chat. You spoke earlier about helping teenagers change their story to embrace something more positive. How do you do that? Yeah, okay. What tools do you have in your toolbox?
So if I had to say, well, what are the 2 or 3 things you need to remember when you're helping a student, reading the question here, when you're helping a student dealing with difficulty in their life, and you want to use a story as a way to get access to that, how do you do? What are the things you should remember? The first thing is the same skill that any interviewer needs. Dan, you're a great interviewer, and I know that because you have a characteristic that all my favorite people have, which is you have a great ear, and you listen and you pick up threads and you hold what the person is saying, And so the first thing to do when you're talking to a young person who's going through something difficult is you hold what they're saying, and then you show them what they're saying by reflecting their story back to them. And the first thing that does is it helps a kid who is going through difficulty. And usually when people are going through difficulty, it's hand in hand with feeling isolated. Very few people are like, I am going through a really tough time. It's really difficult, and I'm experiencing a lot of trauma, and I am so fully understood by everybody around me. Those don't go together, because part of what trauma is feeling like you're the only one dealing with it, or you're from an island that no other person is from or on right now. But if you can hold the story, you can say, I'm on your island, but I understand your island. So now the student or the kid is starting to feel like, okay, at least you have an inkling of an understanding of where I'm at. And then the next step is, now that I'm telling you back your story, and I'm gonna play with some of the wording and see if you can get your head around that. So for example, you might say, like, a student who's feeling like, with COVID-19, their graduation plans are being scuttled, and there's a lot of disappointment, a lot of anxiety. I have a lot of that with my students now. First, I'm listening, and then I'm repeating back, and it sounds like therapy, and there's a reason why therapists use that technique, but saying it sounds like you're dealing with, you had a plan in place about what the story of your life was going to be, and then this thing has gone kablooey, and all your plans are tossed out the window, and you're like metaphors are great. You're like a boat rocked around on the sea, and you don't know which way is north, and you've lost your sense of direction. It sounds like you're going to be trying to figure out how to get your boat to go. It may not be able to go in the same direction you're going, but it needs to go in a direction. Let's think about that. The power of metaphor and the power of recasting a story can be really powerful for somebody who's feeling like life has no meaning and no structure, to saying it does have a meaning and a structure. It's just not the one that it was before.
That's great. Yeah, I appreciate that, to recast one story. I just was thinking about there's a lot of moments in the water and in this pond in the back of their school, and so just thinking about what it means to go in the water and to recast. I'm just thinking about fishing. Like you throw your line in and you pull up a story, same old fish. But if you recast it somewhere differently, sometimes you get a better and different fish. I don't know. I'm on a pescatarian metaphor kick these days. So.
Well, the water is the water is a metaphor for the unknown by its nature, right? Because you can only see the surface, and down beneath the surface are all the bad things and the good things. The sea monsters are down there,
right?
Like, and Will's afraid of leeches. That's one of the reasons he won't go in the water. Those are little sea monsters, right? But also the water contains bounty, and he sees at one point thousands of wriggling tadpoles, and he's both attracted to it and horrified of it. And if you've ever seen thousands of tadpoles in the water, it's not a pretty sight, but it's a eye-catching sight, to be sure. And that's all in the water, and not to mention fish for sustenance and for survival. So it makes sense to me that every time you cast in there, you don't know what you're going to pull out. But if you don't like what you got the first time, maybe like try a different spot in the water and see what you get the second time. I like that idea.
Yeah, life is like a box of chocolates. Yeah.
Right, that you just stick your fishing pole into and see what you get.
Exactly. Mixed metaphors are one of the great gifts of our language.
Indeed. Yeah.
I had a couple more questions. We have a few more minutes till 3.
Sure.
I had a question about this is about the process of writing this book. And so like I've come to understand more about how there are some pieces of the book that are autobiographical in terms of the medical condition that Will had, your protagonist. But there are many other things that weren't autobiographical. And so I wonder, like, as we grow older, we keep telling ourselves stories about who we are, who we were. And if we're in the lucky position to sit down and write a story that is based on some truths of our youth, I wonder what that does to our story of ourself, meaning that you have a story of yourself as the author, as a person. You write a book about someone else who shares some characteristics with you. What did you learn, or what changed in your story, if anything, after writing a story about someone who is kind of Evan adjacent?
Yeah. Well, on the one hand, it would be easy and probably too simple to say that it turned a particularly painful chapter of my life into the first chapter of a long journey of of personal glory and achievement, or success and joy. That would be oversimplifying, but not completely untrue, because certainly if you had been able to show me a window into the way that some of my experiences ended up in a novel when I was 12 or 13, it might have put a little glide in my stride to know that.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember at times as a young person thinking, how long do I need to slog through this until I can experience some of the joys of adulthood and have the stuff in the rearview mirror to make sense out of. On the other hand, I think the book is never closed, so to speak, on those pains in the past. And there are times when reading a chapter of Turtle Boy for an audience, or listening to the audiobook while I wash dishes. I haven't had a chance to listen to it. I heard myself read it, but it's not the same thing. And certain scenes strike me very powerfully. And while the scenes might be beautiful to my ear, and I might have a kind of sort of cathartic cry in that moment, it's not purely one of and everything is fully happily ever after, because we, as adults, we have demon dogs that chase after us. And for the most part, we're able to keep our demon dogs at bay with complicated psychological tricks. We have our ego defenses. We can throw them a steak once in a while and they'll run after it while we go the other way. But when your ego defenses are down and you're going through a bumpy experience, those demon dogs can nip at your heels. And there are times when my back might, as an adult, my back might feel up against the wall, and I feel like that kid again. Not like the now successful, now happy, married with a child, writer, teacher, living the dream that I've always wanted to have person, but a wounded and forever wounding and remending human being that still experiences a main line back to the pain if the circumstances are right. So to answer your question, it's an on the one hand, on the other. On the one hand, those painful things become the material of beautiful art later on. And on the other hand, that's, some of that pain never goes away. And I wish I could go back and, reassure myself that, things are going to get better, and they do, but also understanding that once you've endured something, that, you'll always have a scar there. The scar will heal and it'll be closed up, and you'll be one whole being, but you'll still have the scar. And then, as those of you who've ever heard scar stories, there's a reason we like to tell scar stories, right? We like to tell them. People say, like, how'd you get that scar? Let me tell you how you got this. There's always a story there. So it occurs to me, maybe Turtle Boy is my scar story.
Yeah, interesting. Well, just one reflection on that. There is something about there is some power and agency that we accrue to ourselves when we feel that we can tell our story in a way that feels true to us. In some way, we can't change the past, and there are things about ourselves we can't change, even with therapy, even with insight, even with structural changes around us. But there is some power and agency that we have when we can say, no, the story that I've told myself is not my life. John Kabat-Zinn has this great phrase, right? The story of your life is your story, not your life. And that's really powerful, right?
That's amazing.
So, yeah,
I love that.
He's the guy. Well, those are the things I was hoping to talk about with you today. Thanks.
This was great.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. The recording of this will be available on thejewishlive.com, or is it .org? I can never remember. You'll find it easily.
Website. Google it
on the Mind stage. We look forward to seeing what's next.
I do too, and I look forward to more conversations with you, Dan. This has been great.
Me too. Thanks. Okay, take care. Enjoy the weekend. Bye, everybody.
So long, everybody. Enjoy the sunshine.
Take care.
Bye-bye.